Homelander, Vought's prized creation, the leader of the Seven, and the most powerful soup in the boys' universe. And Metro Man, the one and only guardian of Metro City, or Metrocity, and presumably the most powerful soup in his universe as well. One of these guys is a laboratory experiment, and one of them was the last hope of a dying world. But both of these characters are very akin to Superman, but are kind of different once you look deeper into them. Seeing as how the boys is coming back this week, I think there's no better time to talk about this matchup. I always see people put Homelander up against Superman or Omni-Man. That's just unfair spite. But putting him against Metro Man might be a little bit more fair. Or is it? Because yeah, Metro Man is kind of seen as featless in the general power scaling community. I've unironically heard people say that he's wall level. So hey, if he's wall level, let's put him against Homelander. Make it mid-diff. But on a serious note, both of these characters are kind of seen as weak in the power scaling community. So I aim to do justice by both of them today. So with that all being said, let's get right into this matchup. So let's start off with the Homelander. Seeing as how his show's coming back this week, I think it's only fair that we go over his stats, his attack potency, durability, and speed first. For better or for worse, Homelander is a big fish in a little pond, which means that he is the strongest. So to get a baseline for all of his stats, we're gonna have to talk about the feats of the characters he upscales. For a nice baseline, we're gonna have to talk about Black Noir, as he has some pretty decent stuff, and Homelander pretty easily disposed of him. Black Noir is able to casually kill a soup terrorist who can easily generate a small building level explosion. Black Noir is able to no-sell this explosion, yet when Homelander, does his thing. Yeah. But other than that, small building to even building levels seems to be pretty consistent with most of the low to mid tiers in the verse. Keep in mind, Homelander upscales all of these characters, one of these characters being Maeve, as he's stronger than her, and I know their scuffle kind of indicates relativity, but Homelander is on the defensive for most of the duration of the fight, and all she can really do is stagger him, and even then he wins, so yeah. Maeve was able to endure Soldier Boy's final explosion point blank, which when calculated falls into the large building to even city block ranges of power. Soldier Boy also happens to have no-soul this explosion as well, and Homelander was pretty casually able to beat him after a short scuffle, with the latter needing Billy Butcher as well as an amped Huey to nearly hold down Homelander. And even then, Homelander gets out of it pretty easily. But we can talk about higher ends of power if we're to discuss The Boys Diabolical, which is an anthology-style animation spin-off of The Boys. Most of these episodes aren't really canon, but 3 of them are. And we have to use 2 of the 3 episodes to get some higher ends for Homelander. So starting off with the first of these episodes, which is all about him, as it seems to be a prequel of sorts, depicting Homelander's first mission, where he fails in spectacular fashion, where he ultimately causes himself to be at the epicenter of a huge factory explosion. The yield of this explosion has been calculated to be in the multi-city block to even small town ranges of power. And Homelander was basically fine after this happened, with him not really showing any notable injuries. In the Boys episode, Nubian vs. Nubian, which is confirmed to be canon as well, Nubia is able to generate a thunderstorm, which typically create large town amounts of power. Homelander, via being the strongest soup in the verse, should upscale this feat. So overall, via his rank in the Boys verse, Homelander would find himself getting some large buildings to even large town levels of scaling. We have some higher ends to talk about. Granted, these scaling chains are pretty dubious, but we'll cross that bridge when we have to. So starting off with the first meta, a Vought rep claims that they've tested every weapon on Homelander and none of them were able to work. At first glance, the statement seems pretty, concrete. For most characters, this means that, they upscale things like nuclear bombs, but the more you think about it, the less sense it kind of makes. Like, how did a Vought rep get a nuclear bomb and then why would they use it on Homelander? It's kind of like odd. But I'm not here to question his scaling today, so let's just give it to him. Assuming that he can actually no-sell nuclear bombs, this would grant him some city level scaling. But if we choose to take this sentiment hyper literal, this would include the Sharp Bomb, which was capable of yielding an explosion equivalent to 101.5 megatons, which is around mountain level. One could attempt to argue that this level of power is actually consistent for Homelander, especially if one were to take his threats to Starlight to heart, in which he states he would wipe New York City off the map. Assuming this is during one attack and not over time, this would be a feat requiring around 240 megatons of TNT. But considering we are talking about a madman's tirade statements and then taking them at the most face value of interpretations, the scaling chain overall is pretty questionable to me personally. But as for his speed now, Homelander is pretty consistently in the hypersonic ranges, as even as a child, he was apparently able to break the sound barrier. During the season 1 finale, he was able to save Bully Butcher from an explosion, also outspeeding it in the process, which gets calculated to around Mach 10. And Homelander is stated to have flew to space before, meaning that he can presumably reach escape velocity, which is around Mach 33. But we can get into the relativistic levels of speed, as Soldier Boy is consistently able to react to Starlight and Butcher's light-based attacks, and Homelander obviously is superior to Soldier Boy. Also, I want to note that Homelander has laser eyes, which should be presumably around his same attack potency, and they're also stated to be beams of light, so he has a light speed attack via that. With decent enough attack potency and speed ends, it's no wonder Homelander thinks, as he puts it,
"Listen, Annika, I'm the Homelander, and I can do whatever the fuck I want."
Like Homelander, Metro Man is a paragon of power in his verse, so as a baseline to all his stats, we're gonna have to dive into the feats of those he physically upscales. As for starters, there is Megamind himself, and yeah, in terms of attack potency, he seems to be roughly human level in terms of, AP, but like most cartoon characters, his durability is much higher than that, as Megamind is shown to brush off attacks and survive things that would normally cripple or even kill regular individuals. My favorite showcase of this comes from the spin-off comics, where he was able to pretty much shrug off a large building level explosion that was equivalent to around 8.48 tons of TNT. Another character that Metro Man upscales is Titan. And yeah, I know at first glance you might think that the two are equals, but due to actual showings, they're not. And it's actually consistent with lore. You ever ask yourself, how come Titan, while bloodlusted, never blitzed or is portrayed to be nearly as fast as Metro Man? Well, it's pretty simple, because according to the novelization, the scraps of DNA that would ultimately make up Titan's powers were scraps of dandruff found on Metro Man's cape. So yeah, that's kind of barely anything. So while yes, Titan seems to have the same powers, i.e. strength, durability, speed, and even laser eyes, these stats don't seem to be nearly as potent as Metro Man's. Despite this, Titan is a character who can casually destroy several city blocks using his laser eyes, and most impressively, he was able to chunk a skyscraper, which comes out to around city block level when accurately calculated. Keep in mind this scales to Metro Man's dandruff, as that will be very important later. But moving on to Metro Man's individual scaling, as you're gonna need that in order to get into his really juicy stuff. And at first glance it might be a little difficult because he doesn't really have that much feats in the film due to his pretty minor role, but we have a lot of narrative implications, and this time I have statements and guidebooks to back up my points. So the main thing we need to establish when scaling Metro Man is that he upscales all of Megamind's inventions and any physical things that they can do, as that's literally the entire narrative of Megamind. He got so bored that he left. But for those of you guys who thought it was iffy when I just said it by itself around a year ago, I had the scans from the Megamind art book to back up what I'm saying. Yes, I actually read a Megamind art book. But moving on, the guidebook says that Megamind is fascinated by Metro Man's godlike strength. And if you want a confirmation for their dynamic, it's stated that Metro Man found no challenge in dealing with Megamind or his escapades. Metro Man is referenced to be invincible, and as previously mentioned, he was driven into retirement due to how bored he was of Megamind's antics, with the one thing that didn't yield to his might being a midlife crisis. So with all that, Metro Man should upscale all of Megamind's weapons and technical capabilities. This is pretty notable because Megamind was able to turn the Atlantic Ocean into jelly. I didn't get a calc on that, but Atlantic Ocean is a pretty big body of water. But anyways, Megamind is implied to have nuclear bombs or be capable of getting them. The art book also states that Megamind creates world-threatening devices, and according to the next paragraph, Metro Man defuses these weapons. Note the same art book says that Metro Man isn't too smart, so the context is that he literally just destroys them, so he upscales them. I know world threatening is pretty broad by itself, but I think that we can argue that it's at least multi-continental, as he's trying to rule the world, not destroy it. But this level of attack potency is actually consistent with a shown weapon in the film, that being the Death Ray, which he uses on Metro Man. When analyzed, the destructive output of this device, when calculated based on what we see on screen, comes out to around city level or town level, if I remember correctly. But Megamind himself states that the beam is equivalent to the full concentrated power of the sun, which we can use to get the beam's output to much higher ends. Assuming this beam is only equivalent to a mere second of the sun's energy output, this would mean that the laser death ray is capable of shooting a beam equivalent to around 91.7 petatons of TNT, which is enough power to destroy multiple continents. Keep in mind that's a massive lowball, as the film makes it pretty clear that the death ray is utilizing more than a single second of the sun's energy output, as it literally has to charge up after being fired. So the true yield of this device should be much higher. And to all the trolls who ask why did it only destroy a mountain, well, that's because, as Megamind says, the power is concentrated and directly aimed at Metro Man's whereabouts. So yeah, that power is not going to be spread out throughout, a bunch of continents. He's not trying to do that. He's trying to hit Metro Man specifically. Granted, Metro Man doesn't tank it in the film, as he uses his super speed to dodge around it, but we have a lot of narrative implications and even inverse proof to suggest that the beam would not have worked on Metro Man. For starters, everyone is shocked that the weapon actually managed to work, including the weapon's creator being Megamind, who says verbatim later that he didn't think it would actually work. Also, something pretty important to note is that Metro Man, who made up the plan to fake his death, concluded that in order to sell the public on the idea of this machine killing him, acted to be weak to copper on top of the laser already hitting him. There's also the fact that in the short sequel, Megamind and the Button of Doom, the death ray is utilized on a robot, and yeah, the robot's destroyed, but the head, which got hit point blank, is actually shown to be intact. Metro Man should upscale any physical performance of any of Megamind's tech due to all of the guidebook statements and art book statements, But if that's still not enough for you guys, which I know that it's not for some people, I went out of my way to ask one of the writers of the original Megamind film himself, being Brent Simmons. I basically asked him if Metro Man could survive a point-blank shot from the death ray, and he said probably, which means almost certainly. And he even used the same logic that I did when I skilled this character last year. So versus wiki, I'm talking you guys straight up. I saw that guy trying to buff Metro Man using my metas, give him the buff. It's confirmed. It's confirmed that he would survive the death ray, meaning that Metro Man cannot be killed by forces equivalent to 91.7 petatons, which is multi-continental once again. But is this level of power consistent in the verse, or is it just a wild outlier? Let's get into that. Outside of using the death ray, there are actually ways to get Metro Man to island and even country level casually, as once again they come from the premise that Metro Man upscales anything Megamind could ever make. This is notable because Megamind can create mountain-sized ships that can encase entire cities and then fly them into space. This is literally a mountain-sized construct flying at escape velocity speed, so the kinetic energy of its movements would be something that Metro Man would upscale. Assuming Metro City is a stand-in for something like New York City, such a huge and heavy city moving at such speeds, combining that already with the massive size of the spaceship, would mean that this thing is producing kinetic energy equivalent to large island level. But the art book states that Metro City is actually a coastal city like Los Angeles or San Francisco. So assuming that it's actually a stand-in for San Francisco, the kinetic energy of this construct during its interstellar travel would be around island level. But we can actually get them to country level, and it's pretty funny because if you guys remember, like I said, the DNA that would give Titan his power is basically just Metro Man's, dandruff. Someone actually took the DNA difference between dandruff and like a full person, and he was able to determine a difference of around 277.5 billion. So theoretically, we can upscale Titan's city block level output by 277.5 billion, and this would mean bare minimum a full power based Metro Man would theoretically be able to perform feats in the teratons, which is country level. Moving on to his speed now, obviously you have the very infamous speed feat with him seemingly having a midlife crisis and epitome in the span of like a second. During this time frame, he eats at a diner, flies a kite, and even reads multiple books. But the most important aspect of this feat is that Megamind was perceived as frozen as well and couldn't even see Metro Man. At first glance, this might not seem too impressive, but Megamind is a character who can react and dodge lasers, i.e. light speed attacks, as well as perceive objects while being in an object himself flying from Megamind's home, which is stated to be either in a far-off galaxy or an entire different universe if you really want to wank, to our own planet Earth. Due to this absurd distance already being traveled, any realistic value would put this ship's speed in the MFTL plus ranges, and Megamind could perceive and view this object while Metro Man merely walking at super speed was totally unnoticed by Megamind as an adult. This ship was able to travel from a different galaxy to the planet Earth in a couple seconds, right, if we use on-screen time. And Megamind was able to see Metro Man on the opposite end of where he was, while Metro Man walking right in front of Megamind, he didn't see him at all. But if you want some type of quantifiable speed value, using the dandruff meta, Titan is able to reach Mach speed as he leaves a Mach cone while running away from Megamind disguised as Metro Man. Assuming that this is his top speed, and then upscaling it by 277.5 billion, this would mean a full base Metro Man would bare minimum be able to fly at speeds equivalent to 315,000 times faster than the speed of light. With such power and speed, it's kind of easy to see why Metro Man got bored of everything, as it seems that at the end of it all of his fame, notoriety, and even power, he found himself asking one thing: was Metro Man the strongest because he was Metro Man, or was he Metro Man because he was the strongest? Agree or disagree with his choice, he ultimately found a way to be happy with himself, and you gotta give him props for that.
I have eyes that can see right through lead.
So with the statistics of our combatants fully analyzed, who wins? And yeah, Metro Man wins. He's much stronger and much faster. Even using Homelander's most wank, disingenuous ends, Metro Man should probably still one-shot. There's also the fact that Homelander could never ever hope to hurt Metro Man, and I got a pretty good example or way of putting this. At best, Homelander upscales the SAR bomb, a very, very powerful nuclear device, don't get me wrong. But Metro Man is confirmed to be able to survive the full concentrated power of the sun. If we're assuming that this is only 1 second's worth of the sun's concentrated energy, right, or solar output, that would be energy equivalent to 1,820,000,000 SAR bombs. So more than likely, Homelander would probably just really hurt himself if he exerted himself trying to hurt Metro Man, That durability gap is crazy work. 1 billion? If you took Homelander's highest end and then gave him a 1 billion times strength multiplier, he would still be weaker than Metro Man. And that speed thing is really nasty. You could probably just walk up to him and pinky flick him and he would die. This matchup kind of reminds me of Titan versus Metro Man as we saw in the film. You know, Titan being the character who's much closer to Homelander in stats, you know, upscaling people who can, you know, dodge lasers and, you know, having city block level AP casually. And he ran away when he saw Metro Man. There's also the fact, despite us not really seeing anything from Metro Man in the film, he's much more experienced and skilled than Homelander. As to our knowledge, Homelander's only had like 1 or 2 real fights at this point, and even then he was probably a decent chunk stronger than each person he was fighting. More times than not, Homelander is just kind of stopping petty thieves or, you know, terrorists. Like literally in season 1, he just walks around and spams his laser eyes. Like he don't really be using his powers that much. And yeah, I'm aware you can say the exact same thing for Metro Man, but he was beefing with Megamind at least. That guy's making world-threatening devices, you know? He has access to nuclear bombs, he can create gigantic machines. He literally has a satellite death ray that, you know, harnesses the full concentrated power of the sun. So yeah, even though he didn't really exert himself on Megamind, it's pretty clear that he's still a bigger threat than the average guys that Homelander has to deal with. So the winner of today's video is Metro Man. So yeah, I hope I was able to change some of you guys' minds on Metro Man's overall scaling. I know it's a bit contentious and it's new, and I want to take credit. I'm the one who made all that. Do you think that I wanked him or lowballed Homelander, or was this the outcome that you expected? This is obviously the first boys video on the channel, and it's a pretty decently powerful verse. And yeah, it's not the strongest, but that just makes it very versatile. Like, I can put a lot of different IPs up against it. So if you're interested in other boys videos with other street tier and, you know, city tier characters, let me know in the comment section. But as always, I'll see you guys next week. But until then, stay big G fans.